Hello everybody, it's Merlin here, and I'm finally going to do a response to my own tag video. I'm not sure how many people did it yet. I saw a couple people respond into the comments, which is cool. So I figured since I'm kind of going back and watching this old show again, which is of course my favorite anime of all time, Fullmetal Alchemist and Brotherhood to some extent, I figured I would answer some of these questions. What is your favorite episode or moment of either or both series? My favorite moment in the first series probably comes down to the episode where the brothers have to go back to the island where they began their training, where they learn the all is one, one is all concept. Because I think that, because there are a lot of really complicated ideas, but a lot of universal concepts that I think are very important and interesting that Fullmetal Alchemist explores. But I think the concept that all of nature and all of life is connected, and also the fact that even though people may see themselves as being a part of it, they are still part of this much larger system of life, which is almost beyond their own understanding. And I think that for the boys, they really learn a great deal originally, and kind of having to kind of go back and rediscover their roots to kind of learn what it means to be humble as an alchemist is really central to some of the main ideas of either series. In Brotherhood, there's actually one moment which isn't quite as important plot-wise, but it's a really good character moment that I always found really intense to the point where it stuck with me. Is at one point, shortly after, spoilers here of course, the brothers find out that Bradley is a homunculi, he's actually sitting down with them, having dinner with them, with his family, and he kind of makes this slight threat about, basically threatening his brother, saying like, oh, you know the value of family as much as I do, so I can relate to the pain that I would cause if I lost somebody in that situation. It's just like this perfectly veiled threat that really just drives home like how intimidating the homunculi are, and the fact that like the entire government's in on this, and Edward really doesn't have much of a choice, and he's really just at the mercy of this guy. And it just kind of showcased how fearsome a villain Bradley really was. I mean, even though I do like him in the first series, you really see him as an intimidating force, and just he's wrath in Brotherhood, and you really feel it, that he's incredibly hateful, but also very charismatic. What is your least favorite episode or moment of either or both series? I think going back and watching the original series again, I'm pretty okay with most of the filler-ish episodes, because most of them do kind of add to the plot, or at least the themes or the character elements, as part of the bigger story later. But I really don't like the fake Elric brothers that much, because there are several instances in the series where we get to learn about the concept of family and loss, and even bonds between brothers specifically, that did we really need to have another group of brothers who are also alchemists doing something similar? There's a couple times in the series, like for instance, there's one with two young Ishbalan boys that learn about something with their mother that could be related to Adonal's mom. It's like there's so many examples, like they kind of start repeating the same ideas. I think that's one that they weren't bad, but I don't know if they really necessarily needed to be there. My least favorite part of Brotherhood, though, that's pretty easy. Honestly, most of like the first 10 episodes or so, which is basically all the stuff that they did in the first half of like the original anime kind of sped up. Admittedly, do a good job of condensing, and it does feel very fresh, but in all honesty, it does lose some of that emotional impact, and you don't feel like the characters are quite as well developed at that point. But then again, if you've seen the first series already, you'd know that. Naturally, a couple things like Cornello, when they meet him with their mission in the original town, that's cut down. Tucker obviously is cut down to one episode, and the Nina stuff. And even the death of Hughes is honestly not as monumental because he dies so early. So honestly, the first chunk of that series is just really frustrating, especially as somebody who's had a lot more time to experience fleshed out characters and plot ideas and the world of this entire story in the first anime. Next, who is your favorite character? Now, when it comes to Fullmetal Alchemist, it's one of those series where it's really hard, because one of the great things about the series is, the characters are all so well done. There are so many well done characters in the main cast and the supporting characters. In fact, the supporting characters are often not as well developed or as interesting as the main characters. Some people would say more so. It's really tough. I mean, I've often said that there are a couple that could be possible. I really like Mustang. I think I even like Roy Mustang more in retrospect than I used to, because I thought that he was a good character, but he's portrayed in slightly different ways in both series, but he still is an awesome character, and it's kind of difficult which version I'd say I prefer more. It's definitely a topic for another video. I do like his relationship with the Elric brothers. When you first meet him, you think he's kind of arrogant and silly, and you think he's just a stereotypical guy, but he really does want to make up for the mistakes of the past and really change the government and change things. And he wants to get revenge, basically, for what happened to Hughes in both series. And in Brotherhood, you get a sense that, I don't know, he really gets mad about it. He's very upset in the first series, but he goes on vengeance in Brotherhood. But Mustang's a great character. I also really like Azumi. I think her as a mentor role, she really is the closest thing to a real parent that the brothers ever really have. And I like the fact that she is just this complicated and well-balanced character because she still has that motherly atmosphere about her, but she's still very tough and quick to anger sometimes, but she's also very wise. And I don't know, she's very likable. I've always thought she was a great character. Honestly, one of the greatest teachers in anime that I've ever seen. But, I mean, when it comes down to it, it's kind of hard for me to say that the brothers aren't my favorite characters. I think that Al has typically been my favorite because I think I relate to him being someone has a little bit more balance of a perspective, a little cooler head, kind of a very humble, nice person. I mean, Al's just so adorable. I mean, it's hard to dislike him, but he's also very tough, and he's also one to defend people. He's a very good person. It's hard to dislike him. You get the sense that despite his appearance, he really is a child, too, which I think is difficult to pull off. But as I'm watching the shows again, I think Edward is a great protagonist. I think his development's great. I think that his portrayal as being this realistic young person. He's also someone who has to learn to relearn that he doesn't know everything he thinks he should know and just grow from there. And he's just a good character. And, it's funny. I realize Hughes has also been one of my favorite characters, too. But, man, what happens to him is just rough. But, yeah, I think it probably comes down to either of the brothers. Who is your least favorite character? This is a filler character, but once again, from that episode, there's several episodes with the fake Elric brothers, that one Baron guy that wanted to use the red water, that guy was just like a throwaway villain. I don't know. I feel like there's a couple of those, and I don't know. He was just pretty bland, and his motivations were pretty basic. You just kind of could throw him out the window. Now we get to the fun one. Who is your favorite villain? Now, this is really obvious. My favorite villain is from the first series, and that's Shao Tucker. Because, well, obviously his relationship with the brothers is kind of one of their first big indications that they look up to somebody who's dabbling into some really dark arts involving alchemy, and once again it kind of reminds them of their taboo. And there's the relationship with Nina, and all those memories of their mistake kind of come flooding back with this person that they admired who was one of their advisors, one of their teachers, kind of a brief family father figure, once again, who betrays them. And one of the things that I find interesting watching Fullmetal Alchemist again, and trying to experience it and realizing it, when I first saw the show, I was a teenager, so I think I was able to relate to the kids much more, but I find myself relating more to the adult characters. And one of the themes that they really like to drive through is the fact that the perception and responsibility of children, their place in the world, versus that of the adults running everything, is definitely defined, but the transition of growing up and learning more about the world and how complicated it is, and being reminded that these kids are still going through that and having to take on these burdens, is one of the things I really like. And the villains like to kind of tug at their heartstrings and mess with them at every opportunity because they're so young. And I find that really fascinating. And Tucker is just one of the most disturbing villains. And the strange thing is, though, as creepy as he is, he's almost sympathetic later on because he really also kind of wants to make up for his mistake. But it's kind of hard to tell. He's pretty evil through most of it, but he's definitely gone, though. He definitely is gone. And obviously in Brotherhood, he's an important character, and his first action does have an effect, but he's not really a part of the show. So there's that. Also, I love Dante. I mean, as a main villain, I just think her motivations on a personal level just make her much more devious, and the fact that she's a human. I know Father, people like him for his ambitions, and his revelation towards the end is interesting, but I just think in terms of complexity and the relation to the brothers in Hohenheim, Dante is just a much more disturbing villain to me because of her humanity. But I also really like Envy in the original series because she's basically Ed's arch enemy, and I won't reveal the twist if you guys don't know that, but the way they pull Envy off is really, really good in the original, and he just has much more characterization. I think the best thing about Envy and Brotherhood is honestly his death, and I am switching him when I refer to his sex, because I think in the first series he's more androgynous. I always kind of felt it was a she because he was had a voice actress, which is fine. Envy was still a good henchman, henchwoman, hench thing in Brotherhood, and definitely had a really awesome death. And she still did hate humanity, but it was a more general hatred of humanity, representing Father's hatred rather than the more personal hatred for the Elrics. So I like Envy in Brotherhood, but once again, one of the things I think that, for the most part, the first series did better was the villains, which most people can agree on. What is the best fight for all the shonen action junkies out there? I mean, in the first series, I think it's true that there are fewer all-out fights, unfortunately. So I think everyone pretty much agrees that the best fight, it might not be the best fight in terms of action. I think certainly within the original anime it's true, but Brotherhood, in terms of action, is just a superior series. For combat, that's fine, but the fight that probably has the most real weight to it, to the story, is the original Greed versus Ed fight, which is just monumental in terms of characterization and growth and the dynamic between the homunculi and Edward and the sacrifice that Greed ultimately makes and his development and his realization of what he is and how bad his compatriots are and his kind of respect and understanding of Ed through, once again, dealing through Al, and how Ed uses the opportunity but ultimately regrets it when he realizes he's taken a life, and his struggle to, basically balance the idea between what is considered human and what is not, and his respect for life that he's trying to hold on to because he wants to not make the same mistakes, but he still kind of has to make some of the same mistakes in order to persevere and save his brother and save everybody. It's a very, very intense fight because of what's going on underneath, because of the subtext. I think that's something that tends to get overlooked in these fights when people look at the bare nature of it. They don't look at basically what the fights necessarily mean. A fight can be well animated, a fight could have some cool attacks, but if there isn't some strong context behind it in terms of driving the plot and characters forward, ultimately it's kind of a hollow fight. And I think that's the difference between a well-written series or not. And I think that's why a lot of people forget that Fullmetal Alchemist is a shonen, is because it deals with so many things that shonen barely touch on a lot of times, and it goes into a lot of depth, and well, honestly, it doesn't really conduct itself in the typical shonen formula, at least the first series. So that's one of the things about it that's really great, and in that fight it's true. Now, on the other end of the spectrum with Brotherhood, it was actually a lot tougher, because I will be honest, there are a lot of really good fights in Brotherhood. They really are. Just thinking back to some of the animations, some of the epic explosions and the mass destruction caused, there's a lot of cool looking stuff in Brotherhood. I can't deny that it's a beautiful series, but I have to bring it down to Mustang versus Envy, because he has most of the best fights, and Mustang, once again, his vengeance upon Envy in that one is amazing. It's just his rage and his determination and just how he ultimately takes him down is pretty awesome. But I do have to say, that's probably my favorite fight based on that memory. Where does it rank for you as your favorite anime? I have talked about this before. You guys pretty much know Fullmetal Alchemist is pretty much my favorite show of all time. Sometimes I swap it with Dragon Ball. I'd usually say it's the number one spot. Sometimes it's number two, depending on my mood. Do you prefer Brotherhood or the original, and why? Once again, you guys probably know this. I do prefer the original. I do like the way that the writing fleshes out the characters more and fleshes out the world more. And my biggest issue with Brotherhood over the original series is, I mean, the story is about the brothers and their struggle, their bond, all that stuff. And ultimately, in Brotherhood, they're essentially made side characters of their own story. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the plot, being based on a manga that was completed, certainly makes Brotherhood feel like a more solid series a lot of the time. And the way the plot moved is still very good, and I'd say about as intriguing as the one in the original series. But the first series felt a lot darker, and it delved into the themes and really, really tugged on emotional responses for the audience. You really felt like you were with the brothers going through these very, very human experiences, and everything about it just feels more down to earth, more believable, human. And I guess that makes it a more introspective and influential series for me in terms of just the response it got out of me. And admittedly, viewing it now, it's different than I viewed it originally. I will admit that there is some nostalgic attachment to the original series because it was my first big official anime experience. I had seen some series before that, but that was like my first big anime series that I loved with full knowledge and understanding of what anime was as a medium. Now, Brotherhood, I really like too for a lot of other reasons. I honestly, used to hate on it, and when I finally started watching it and got past those initial episodes, which were basically the same but ultimately rushed, and got into the main plot of Brotherhood, I honestly just fell in love with FMA all over again and just an entirely different story. So I kind of treat them like alternate universes, and I often say that they kind of balance out like equivalent exchange. Some characters and concepts get more preference here, and some some action scenes are better over here. I do think that in terms of characterization and thematic discussion, I think that you definitely get the heart and soul of Fullmetal Alchemist in the original series. Brotherhood, though, I think you could argue the plot is a little more solid, which makes sense. But I do prefer the original. What's one thing you think makes this series so classic? I mean, I could, of course, make a whole other video talking about what's great. In fact, answering these questions, I feel like I'm going to go on rants about this. But honestly, it's really hard to pick one thing. I think it's a big blend of many things. I mean, I could say the themes, the plot, the world. I really want to say it's the characters, because I think there are very few anime series that just connect with the audience so well, because they seem so rooted in a world that could possibly be, and they're very well rounded, and the way they're presented isn't very over the top. And I think in the West, in the US specifically, I think that one reason why Fullmetal Alchemist worked is because the characters are written and drawn in a way that is more realistic, and the presentation is more westernized. Now, obviously, it's an anime, and you're going to have some cartoony Japanese elements that come up, but it's a series that is rooted in a Western-type world, based on 20s and 30s Europe, with characters that are meant to be more European, and just the way they act and speak just seems a little more grounded. And I think that those characters being more relatable is one thing that makes it so specific. And that would probably be what I think makes it so classic. I do think one thing that makes it more intriguing for people, though, is alchemy itself, because I think in terms of anime powers and fantasy powers, the way they present anime and Fullmetal Alchemist is very unique and interesting. And I think it opens up to a lot of interesting possibilities that lead to this world and these plot elements and interesting ideas and themes that the series explores. So, in a way, I think the concept of alchemy, the way it was presented, basically allowed for all these other interesting things. So, that might be one. And I'm going to answer my own bonus question, too. Is there anything about either series you don't like? I think I've mentioned this before as well. I think both series are very close to perfection. I really do. I think they're very, very good shows. I think that they are among the best. As I've watched them over the years, I do admit I see flaws in both, not just as adaptations or compared to each other, but just as series in general. They're not perfect. It even hurts me to say that, because I've put Fullmetal Alchemist on this pedestal, and I do think that there are a few series that can claim to be perfect, and I will admit, I actually even think that a series like Samurai 7, which is my third favorite series of all time, I think as a plot within itself actually functions better than Fullmetal Alchemist or Dragon Ball, or maybe even the original Berserk anime, or even a series like Basilisk. I think even though it's a much more simple series, it kind of holds well within its plot. So, even though I do think that the writing overall is much better compared to Basilisk and even a little more than Samurai 7, there are certain elements in terms of some filler that's questionable. There are some revelations of the original series, like specifically the ending. The only thing I really, really dislike about Fullmetal Alchemist, the original, is the revelation with the ending and how it resolves, and the movie. It just feels like glorified fan fiction, which is a video I'll go into another time. But my only real major flaw with the original series is the ending. I think if they had tied up the ending basically the way I'd want them to end Fullmetal Alchemist, or even maybe closer to Brotherhood, it would have been fine. But they kind of rushed things, and I just didn't like the way the series ended. I mean, it's not a terrible ending. As far as anime endings, you could do worse, but I didn't like it that much. It definitely felt a little off. Very random compared to everything else. Brotherhood, in all honesty, is also arguably even closer to being a perfect series within its own storytelling measures. I think that it flows very well. It really does. I find the ending of the Brotherhood to be pretty satisfying. There are issues I have with the villains, but it's one of those things where if I have to just look at the series itself, the only thing that's a problem, which I can't ignore, is that when you watch that original anime and they take like a good 20, 25 episodes before the actual main plot starts, and even within the main plot, to really, really flesh out the world and the characters and explore so many interesting themes that are just very relatable and interesting. I feel like the fact that a lot of that's rushed kind of hurts the main characters and a lot of the thematic ideas of Brotherhood. Now, obviously, they do explore it, but there's so many characters that they just kind of push the main ones aside, and you feel like the anime almost gets a little bombarded. But all in all, though, it's still handled pretty well, except for the beginning. So it's kind of ironic. My biggest issue with the first series is the ending. My biggest issue with Brotherhood is the beginning. So honestly, if you decided to just either give one the ending or flesh out the beginning of Brotherhood, I would honestly be able to tell you which one I thought was better. Like, the fact that I like the first series is because I like the characters and I like the thematics and just the emotional atmosphere it creates. But they're pretty close. I mean, they're both excellent series, and in general, I love Fullmetal Alchemist, which is why I wanted to do this tag. I still have tagged some people. If you haven't answered, please answer in the comments below, or feel free to make another video. I hope that a couple people will be doing it. I won't mention their names, so they won't feel like they're on the hook, but, I always love hearing what people say about Fullmetal Alchemist. It makes me happy, and it's really good to be watching the show again, and I am enjoying it, and it's pretty cool. And I'm definitely going to be doing some more FMA discussions, and about some other new things. There's some new anime coming out, and some anime that came out a little while ago that I might be talking about as well. But in any case, guys, that was my Fullmetal Alchemist tag. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys later. Merlin out. Peace.